The rough bristles of the scrub brush bit into Adelaide Voss's palms as she worked her way across the saloon floor, her knees aching against the worn wood planks that still held the smell of whiskey and tobacco from the night before. She had been at this for 3 hours already, and the August sun of 1878 was just beginning to stream through the grimy windows of the Lucky Dollar Saloon in Los Alamos, New Mexico, reminding her that another brutal day stretched ahead with no end in sight. Her father's gambling debts had become her burden 6 months ago when he died clutching his chest at a poker table, leaving her with nothing but his name and the crushing weight of $3,000 owed to half the businessmen in town. Adelaide pushed a strand of dark hair from her face with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of dirty water across her cheek. She was 22 years old, and this was not the life she had imagined for herself when her family had moved west from Missouri 5 years earlier. Her father had promised her mother on her deathbed that he would take care of Adelaide, that he would see her settled and happy. Instead, he had drunk away their savings and gambled away their future, one card game at a time. "Miss Voss, you missed a spot by the bar," called out Harold Grimshaw, the saloon owner, a portly man with a permanently red face and breath that reeked of cheap gin. He pointed with a thick finger to a dark stain near the brass footrail. "Yes, sir," Adelaide replied quietly, gathering her bucket and brush to move to the indicated area. She had learned quickly that talking back or showing any sign of resistance only made things worse. Grimshaw held the largest portion of her father's debts, nearly $1,200, and he reminded her of it every single day. The saloon doors swung open, letting in a blast of hot desert air and the sound of horses moving down the main street. Adelaide kept her head down, continuing to scrub. She had become invisible in this place, just another piece of furniture that the patrons stepped around or occasionally over when they had too much to drink. "Morning, Grimshaw," a deep voice said from the doorway. "Heard you were open for an early game." Adelaide glanced up despite herself and found her eyes meeting those of a tall man silhouetted against the bright morning light. He stepped further into the saloon, and she could see him more clearly now. He wore dusty trail clothes, a dark hat pulled low over his face, and a gun belt that sat comfortably on his hips like it belonged there. His jaw was strong and shadowed with several days of stubble, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue that seemed to take in everything at once. "Samuel Kincaid," Grimshaw said, his tone shifting to something more respectful. "Did not expect to see you back in Los Alamos so soon. Thought you were driving cattle up to Colorado." "Finished early," Samuel replied, his gaze drifting around the empty saloon before landing on Adelaide. She quickly looked down at her work, her cheeks flushing under the scrutiny. "Trail boss decided to take a different route. Left me and my pay in Santa Fe. Figured I would come back this way and see if the cards were friendly." "Cards are always friendly here if you have got the money to play them," Grimshaw said with a wheezy laugh. "Give me an hour to get set up proper." "You looking to play big?" "Depends on what you call big," Samuel said, still watching Adelaide as she scrubbed. "Who is the girl?" Adelaide felt her stomach tighten. She hated being discussed like she was not right there in front of them. "That is Adelaide Voss. Her daddy died owing half the town money, so she is working off his debts. Good worker, keeps her head down, does not cause trouble." Grimshaw spoke about her like she was a horse he was trying to sell. Samuel was quiet for a moment, and Adelaide could feel his eyes on her. "How much did her daddy owe?" "What is it to you?" Grimshaw asked, suddenly suspicious, just curious. "Seems like a hard way for a young woman to spend her days." $3,000 total, Grimshaw said, puffing up with self-importance. "I hold 1,200 of that. Rest is spread between the general store, the bank, and a few others. She works for me 4 days a week, does washing and mending for the others. At the rate she is going, she will have it paid off in about 10 years, maybe less if she is lucky. 10 years. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had cried all her tears in the first month after her father's death. Now she just worked and tried not to think about the future stretching endlessly before her. "That seems like a mighty long time for a mistake that was not hers," Samuel said quietly. "Debts are debts. Her daddy signed the markers. Someone has to pay them." Grimshaw shrugged. "If you want to play cards, come back in an hour. If you want to philosophize about fairness, go find a preacher." Samuel tipped his hat slightly. "I will be back." He turned to leave but paused at the door and looked back at Adelaide. Their eyes met again, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Then he was gone, the doors swinging shut behind him. Adelaide returned to her scrubbing with renewed vigor, trying to push the encounter from her mind. Men came and went in Los Alamos all the time. Cowboys, miners, gamblers, drifters. Samuel Kincaid would be just another face that passed through, and she would still be here, on her knees, scrubbing floors to pay for her father's sins. The morning wore on. Adelaide finished the saloon floor and moved to the rooms upstairs, stripping beds and hauling dirty linens down to the wash-house out back. The heat was oppressive, and sweat soaked through her plain cotton dress, making the fabric cling to her skin. Her hands were raw and red from the lye soap, and her back ached from bending over the washboards. She was hanging sheets on the line behind the saloon when she heard voices from inside. Grimshaw had opened for business, and the first players were gathering for cards. Adelaide tried not to pay attention, but sounds carried through the thin walls of the building. She could hear the clink of glasses, the shuffle of cards, the low rumble of male voices punctuated by occasional laughter. By early afternoon, Adelaide had finished the washing and was back inside, sweeping the stairs when she heard a commotion from the main room. Grimshaw's voice was raised, angry and disbelieving. "That is impossible. You cannot have that kind of luck." "It is not luck, Grimshaw, it is skill." That was Samuel Kincaid's voice, calm and steady. "You dealt the cards, I just played them." Adelaide crept down a few steps, curiosity getting the better of her. From her vantage point, she could see the card table. Grimshaw was red-faced and sweating, staring at a pile of money in the center of the table. Samuel sat relaxed in his chair, his cards laid out in front of him. "You have been cheating." "You must have been," Grimshaw sputtered. Samuel's expression hardened. "You accuse me of cheating, you better be prepared to back that up, Grimshaw. I have played clean games my whole life. You dealt every hand from your own deck at your own table. You want to check my sleeves? Check them. You want to check the cards? Check them. You will not find anything because there is nothing to find." One of the other players, a ranch hand Adelaide recognized from the Double Bar Ranch, nodded slowly. "He is right, Harold. I watched every hand. It was clean. He just outplayed you." Grimshaw slumped in his chair, staring at the money. "That is everything. You have cleaned me out." "Not everything," Samuel said quietly. He began stacking the bills neatly, counting them out. "I believe this comes to about $1,200. That is what you said you were owed from Adelaide Voss's father, correct?" The saloon went silent. Adelaide gripped the stair railing, her heart suddenly pounding so hard she thought everyone must be able to hear it. "What about it?" Grimshaw asked warily. "I am buying her debt from you. $1,200, right here." Samuel pushed the stack of bills across the table. "Consider it paid in full." "Now wait just a minute," Grimshaw started, but Samuel cut him off. "You said $1,200. Here is $1,200. The debt is paid. unless you want to go back on your word in front of witnesses." Samuel's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath it. Grimshaw looked around at the other men at the table, all of whom were watching him carefully. In a place like Los Alamos, a man's word was his bond. If he refused a legitimate payment of a debt, he would be seen as dishonorable, and that could ruin a business faster than anything else. "Fine," Grimshaw finally said, snatching the money from the table. "Her debt to me is paid, but she still owes the others. You planning on buying all of that too?" "That is exactly what I am planning," Samuel said, standing up from the table. "Who else holds her father's markers?" Within an hour, Samuel Kincaid had visited the general store, the bank, and 2 other establishments in Los Alamos. Adelaide followed at a distance, unable to believe what was happening. She watched through the window of the general store as Samuel counted out bills to pay the $400 her father had owed for supplies. She stood in the shade across the street from the bank as he emerged, having settled the $800 loan her father had taken out and never repaid. By the time the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street, Adelaide Voss was free of debt for the first time in 6 months. She stood outside the boarding house where she rented a tiny room, her mind reeling, trying to process what had just happened. Samuel Kincaid found her there as the evening air began to cool. He walked up slowly, his boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. He stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat, holding it in both hands. "Miss Voss," he said quietly, "I believe we should talk." Adelaide stared at him, 1,000 emotions warring inside her: relief, confusion, suspicion, and something else she could not quite name. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why did you do that?" Samuel looked down at his hat, turning it slowly in his hands. "May I be honest with you, please?" "When I walked into that saloon this morning and saw you on your knees scrubbing that floor, I saw something in your eyes that I recognized. I saw someone who was trapped, someone who was paying for mistakes that were not theirs to pay for. I have been there, Miss Voss. Different circumstances, but the same feeling, like the walls are closing in and there is no way out." He looked up at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "I had some money and some luck today. Seemed like I ought to use both to do something worthwhile. You spent $3,000 on me, on someone you do not even know." Adelaide shook her head slowly. "That does not make any sense." "Maybe not," Samuel agreed, "but it felt right. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. What do you want from me?" Adelaide asked, and she heard the tremor in her own voice. "There has to be something. Nobody does something like this for nothing." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his expression serious. "I am not going to lie to you. When I saw you this morning, I felt something I have not felt in a long time. Interest, curiosity, a pull. I wanted to know who you were, what your story was. But I did not pay those debts to buy you, Miss Voss. You are not property to be traded for cash. I paid them because it was the right thing to do, and because I could not stand the thought of you spending the next 10 years of your life scrubbing floors to pay for your father's mistakes." Adelaide felt tears threatening again, but for a completely different reason this time. "I do not know what to say." "You do not have to say anything tonight. You have had a long day, and I imagine your head is spinning." Samuel put his hat back on and tipped it to her. "I am staying at the boarding house down the street, the one run by Mrs. Henderson. If you want to talk or if you need anything, you can find me there. If you do not want to see me again, that is your choice. The debts are paid either way. You are free." He turned to walk away, and Adelaide heard herself call out, "Wait." Samuel stopped and looked back at her. "Would you like to have supper with me?" The words tumbled out before Adelaide could second-guess them. "It is not much. I have some beans and cornbread back in my room, but it is the least I can do to say thank you." A slow smile spread across Samuel's face, transforming his serious expression into something warm and open. "I would like that very much, Miss Voss." "Adelaide," she said softly. "Please call me Adelaide." "Adelaide," he repeated, and she liked the way her name sounded in his deep voice. "And I am Samuel, though most folks call me Sam." Adelaide's room was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a small table with 2 chairs, and a trunk that held all her worldly possessions. She felt a flush of embarrassment as she opened the door and gestured for Samuel to enter, acutely aware of how shabby everything must look to him. But Samuel did not seem to notice or care about the sparse furnishings. He removed his hat and gun belt, hanging them on the hook by the door with a naturalness that suggested he was comfortable in any surroundings. "This is cozy," he said, and there was no mockery in his tone, only genuine appreciation. Adelaide busied herself with preparing the meal, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She built up the small fire in her stove and set a pot of beans to warm, then mixed cornmeal with water and a bit of precious salt to make the cornbread. Samuel sat at the table and watched her work, and Adelaide found herself intensely aware of his presence in the small space. "How long have you been on your own?" Samuel asked after a while. "6 months, since my father died." Adelaide stirred the beans, keeping her back to him. "Before that, it was just the 2 of us. My mother died of fever when I was 17. We came west from Missouri looking for a fresh start. My father thought he could make a fortune in mining or cattle. Instead, he found whiskey and cards. That must have been hard." "It was," Adelaide admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. "I loved him. Even after everything, I loved him, but I was also angry at him. Angry that he promised my mother he would take care of me and then threw it all away. Angry that he left me with nothing but debts and shame." "You should not feel shame for something that was not your fault," Samuel said firmly. Adelaide turned to look at him. "That is easy to say. Harder to believe when you are on your knees scrubbing floors while men spit on the ground near you and talk about you like you are not even there." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Did Grimshaw mistreat you? Did any of them?" "Not in the way you are thinking," Adelaide said quickly, seeing the anger flash in his eyes. "They did not hurt me. They just made me feel small, invisible, like I did not matter." "You matter," Samuel said, and the intensity in his voice made Adelaide's breath catch. "You matter, Adelaide." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Adelaide felt that pull again, that strange connection that had sparked between them from the first moment their eyes met. She turned back to the stove, her hands trembling slightly as she spooned beans into 2 bowls. The meal was simple but filling, and they ate in companionable silence for a while. Adelaide found herself stealing glances at Samuel when she thought he was not looking, taking in the strong line of his jaw, the calluses on his hands that spoke of years of hard work, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it brushed his collar. "Tell me about yourself," Adelaide said finally, breaking the silence. "It is only fair. You know my whole sad story. What is yours?" Samuel set down his spoon and leaned back in his chair. "Not much to tell, really. I am 26 years old. Been working cattle since I was 14. Lost my parents to cholera when I was 12. Lost my sister to childbirth 2 years after that. Been on my own ever since." "I am sorry," Adelaide said softly. Samuel shrugged. "Long time ago. I have made peace with it. I have worked ranches from Texas to Montana. Saved my money, learned the trade, got good at what I do. I have been thinking lately that maybe it is time to settle down somewhere, put down some roots, get a piece of land of my own." "Is that why you came back to Los Alamos?" "Partly." There is good ranch land around here and water if you know where to find it. Been eyeing a piece of property about 10 miles north of town. Owner wants to sell, move back east to be with his daughter. We have been negotiating for a few months." Samuel paused, his expression becoming uncertain. "I should tell you, Adelaide, what I did today, paying off those debts that took most of my savings. I have enough left to make a down payment on that land, but not much more. I am not a rich man. I just want to be honest with you about that." Adelaide felt a lump form in her throat. "You gave up your savings for me, for a stranger. I told you. It felt right." Samuel reached across the small table and gently took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and Adelaide felt a jolt of sensation at the contact. "I know this is all happening fast. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want you to know that I have honorable intentions. I am not the kind of man who plays games or toys with people's feelings." "What are your intentions?" Adelaide asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Samuel took a deep breath. "I would like to court you, Adelaide, properly. I would like to get to know you and for you to get to know me. I would like to see if this feeling I have, this connection, is something real or just a moment of foolishness. But only if that is what you want too. I am not going to pressure you or make demands. The debts are paid regardless. You are free to make your own choices." Adelaide looked down at their joined hands, her mind racing. This morning she had been a debt slave with no future and no hope. Now this man, this stranger who had appeared out of nowhere like something from a story, was offering her not just freedom but the possibility of something more. It was too much, too fast, and yet Adelaide found herself not wanting to let go of his hand. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "I would like to get to know you, Samuel Kincaid." The smile that spread across Samuel's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Yeah, yeah," Adelaide said, and she found herself smiling back, a real smile, the first one she had felt in months. They talked long into the night, the candle burning down to a stub as they shared stories and dreams. Samuel told her about life on the trail, about vast herds of cattle and endless skies, about nights spent under the stars and days in the saddle. Adelaide told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her mother's garden and her father's laugh before the drink took hold of him, about books she had read and places she wanted to see. When Samuel finally left, well past midnight, Adelaide lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the day's events, hardly able to believe any of it was real. She touched her lips with her fingertips, remembering the moment at the door when Samuel had taken her hand, raised it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles before bidding her good night. "Sleep well, Adelaide," he had said softly. "Tomorrow is a new day, your first day of freedom." Over the next few weeks, Adelaide discovered what it meant to live without the weight of debt crushing her shoulders. She found work as a seamstress, using skills her mother had taught her years ago. The pay was modest but honest, and she worked in a clean, bright room at the back of the dry goods store, not on her knees on a dirty saloon floor. And Samuel courted her with a patience and gentleness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. He took her on walks through the hills around Los Alamos, showing her the hidden springs where wildflowers grew and birds gathered to drink. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but always thoughtful. A smooth river stone, a cluster of sage, a book of poetry he had bought from a traveling merchant. They went to the church social together, and Adelaide felt the eyes of the town on them, the whispers following in their wake. She knew what people were saying, that Samuel Kincaid had bought Adelaide Voss, that she was paying off her debts in a different way now. But when Samuel took her hand and led her into the church hall with his head held high, she found she did not care what people said. For the first time in her life, Adelaide was making her own choices, and she chose to be with this man who had given her back her freedom. "Ignore them," Samuel murmured to her as they stood by the refreshment table, his breath warm against her ear. "They do not matter. All that matters is what is between you and me." "And what is between us?" Adelaide asked, turning to look up at him. Samuel's blue eyes were serious as he gazed down at her. "Something real, something worth holding on to, at least that is what it feels like to me." "To me too," Adelaide admitted, and she saw relief and joy flash across his face. They danced that night, Samuel's hand firm and steady on her waist, guiding her through the steps. Adelaide had not danced since before her mother died, and she stumbled at first, but Samuel was patient, murmuring encouragement until she found the rhythm. They moved together around the floor, and Adelaide felt like she was floating, like the music was carrying them both to someplace beyond the church hall, beyond Los Alamos, beyond everything that had come before. "I am falling in love with you," Samuel said suddenly, his voice low enough that only she could hear over the music. "I need you to know that. I am falling in love with you, Adelaide Voss, and I cannot seem to stop myself." Adelaide's heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Samuel," she breathed. "You do not have to say anything back," he continued quickly. "I just needed to tell you, I needed you to know where my heart is." But Adelaide shook her head, tears springing to her eyes. "I am falling in love with you too. I think I have been since that first morning when you walked into the saloon and looked at me like I was someone who mattered." Samuel pulled her closer, breaking the proper distance that should have been maintained between them as they danced. Adelaide did not care. She rested her head against his chest, hearing the strong, steady beat of his heart, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, happiness was not something that only happened to other people. Samuel finalized the purchase of the land in late September, and he took Adelaide to see it on a crisp autumn morning when the air smelled of pine, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. The property was beautiful, a mix of grassland and forest with a creek running through it and mountains rising in the distance. "This is where I want to build," Samuel said, standing on a slight rise that overlooked the creek. "House right here, barn over there by those cottonwoods. Corrals on the flat ground to the south. What do you think?" Adelaide turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. She could see it in her mind's eye, the house Samuel described, the barn, horses in the corrals, maybe some cattle grazing on the hillside. She could see a garden near the house, a clothesline strung between two trees, children playing by the creek. Children. The thought made her breath catch. Was she really thinking that far ahead? Was she really imagining a future here with Samuel, building a life together? Adelaide. Samuel's voice brought her back to the present. He was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking that it is beautiful," Adelaide said honestly. "I am thinking that you could build something wonderful here." "Not me," Samuel said quietly, stepping closer to her. We could build something wonderful here if you wanted to. If you were willing to take a chance on a cowboy with more dreams than sense and a piece of land with nothing but potential." Adelaide's heart began to pound. "Samuel, what are you saying?" Samuel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Adelaide's breath stopped entirely as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small chip of turquoise set in the center. "I know we have not known each other long," Samuel said, and Adelaide could hear the nervousness in his voice. "And I know you have every reason to be cautious about tying your life to another person after what your father put you through. But Adelaide, I have never been more certain of anything in my life than I am about my feelings for you. I love you. I want to marry you. I want to build a home with you and a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night." I want to work this land with you and raise a family with you and grow old with you." He took a shaky breath. "Adelaide Voss, will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Adelaide's cheeks now, but she was smiling through them. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Samuel. Yes, I will marry you." Samuel let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He set her down gently and slipped the ring onto her finger, and Adelaide stared at it through her tears, unable to believe this was real, that this was her life now. "I love you," she said, looking up at Samuel. "I love you so much it scares me." "I love you too," Samuel replied, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and sure against hers, his arms wrapped around her like he would never let go. They were married in early October of 1878 in the small church in Los Alamos. Adelaide wore a dress she had sewn herself from soft blue calico, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Samuel wore a new suit bought special for the occasion, his hair neatly trimmed, his face clean-shaven for the first time since Adelaide had met him. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stood up with Adelaide, tears streaming down her weathered face. Tom Riley, the ranch hand who had witnessed Samuel winning the money from Grimshaw, stood up with Samuel. The church was small but full, and Adelaide was surprised to see how many people had come. People from the town who had watched her scrubbing floors and now came to see her married. "Do you, Adelaide Marie Voss, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Adelaide looked into Samuel's blue eyes and said, "I do," with a voice that rang clear and certain through the church. "And do you, Samuel James Kincaid, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Samuel said firmly, his gaze never leaving Adelaide's face. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Samuel, you may kiss your bride." Samuel cupped Adelaide's face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the tears that had escaped down her cheeks, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her knees weak. The church erupted in applause and cheers, and Adelaide felt Samuel smile against her lips before he pulled back and took her hand. "Mrs. Kincaid," he said softly, and Adelaide's heart swelled with joy. "Mr. Kincaid," she replied, and they both laughed. They spent their wedding night at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house in the nicest room, which the elderly woman had decorated with wildflowers and fresh linens as her gift to them. Samuel carried Adelaide over the threshold, and she laughed, burying her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, soap and leather, and something uniquely Samuel. He set her down gently inside the room and closed the door behind them, and suddenly the air seemed charged with anticipation. They were married now. This was their wedding night. Adelaide felt her cheeks flush as Samuel looked at her, his expression tender and hungry all at once. "Are you nervous?" he asked gently, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "A little," Adelaide admitted. "Are you?" "A little," Samuel echoed with a smile. "But mostly I am just happy, happier than I have ever been in my whole life." "Me too," Adelaide said, and then she reached up and pulled him down to kiss her. They took their time that night, learning each other's bodies, whispering words of love and need in the darkness. Samuel was patient and tender, making sure Adelaide felt safe and cherished, and when they finally came together, Adelaide felt like something inside her that had been broken was finally made whole. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Samuel's arm around Adelaide, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I cannot believe this is real," Adelaide murmured. "6 months ago I was scrubbing floors and seeing no way out. Now I am here, married to you with a future full of possibilities." "It is real," Samuel assured her, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "This is real, Adelaide. We are real. And tomorrow we start building our life together." The next morning, they loaded their few possessions into a wagon Samuel had bought and headed out to their land. Samuel had been working on building a small cabin for the past month, and it was nearly finished. Just one room for now, but solid and weatherproof, with a good stone fireplace and real glass windows. Adelaide stood in the doorway of the cabin and looked around at what would be her home. Samuel had built a bed frame and a table, and Mrs. Henderson had given them some dishes and pots as a wedding present. It was not much, but it was theirs, earned through honest work and built with their own hands. "What do you think?" Samuel asked, coming to stand behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist. "I think it is perfect," Adelaide said, leaning back against him. "I think we are going to be happy here," and they were happy, deliriously so. Samuel threw himself into building up the ranch, working from dawn to dusk clearing land, building fences, preparing for the small herd of cattle he planned to buy in the spring. Adelaide worked alongside him when she could, and when she could not, she kept the cabin, tended a garden she had planted near the creek, and sewed shirts and mended clothes to bring in a little extra money. The work was hard, sometimes brutally so, but it was good work, the kind that left you exhausted but satisfied at the end of the day. And at night, Samuel and Adelaide would collapse into their bed, talking quietly about their plans and dreams until sleep claimed them. Winter came early that year, and Adelaide had her first experience of a New Mexico winter, which was milder than Missouri but still cold enough to make her grateful for the thick adobe walls of the cabin and the warmth of Samuel beside her in bed. They spent the long winter evenings by the fireplace, Samuel whittling and Adelaide sewing, comfortable in each other's presence. It was on a snowy evening in January of 1879 that Adelaide realized she had not bled in 2 months. She sat very still, her sewing forgotten in her lap as she counted back the weeks and felt a mixture of joy and terror wash over her. "Samuel," she said quietly, and something in her tone made him look up from the piece of wood he was shaping. "Samuel, I think I am with child." The knife clattered to the floor as Samuel stared at her. "You are sure?" "I am not certain, but I think so. I am late, and I have been feeling strange in the mornings, and my breasts are tender." Adelaide pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. "I think we are going to have a baby." Samuel was across the room in 2 strides, kneeling in front of Adelaide's chair, his hands covering hers over her stomach. "A baby," he breathed, and she could see tears shining in his eyes. "Adelaide, are you happy about this? Are you scared?" "Both," Adelaide admitted. "I am terrified. My mother died in childbirth with my little brother. The baby died too. What if something happens? What if I cannot do this?" "Hey," Samuel said firmly, moving his hands to cup her face. "Look at me, Adelaide, look at me. You are strong. You are the strongest person I know. You survived losing your parents, survived debt and shame and hard labor. You can survive this. We will get through this together. I promise you I will take care of you. I will not let anything happen to you." "You cannot promise that," Adelaide whispered. "You cannot control what happens during childbirth." "No, but I can promise I will be with you every step of the way. I can promise I will get you the best midwife in the territory. I can promise I will love you and our child with everything I have." Samuel kissed her gently. "We are in this together, Adelaide. You are not alone." Adelaide felt the fear recede slightly, pushed back by the warmth of Samuel's love and certainty. "We are going to have a baby," she said again, and this time she was smiling. "We are going to have a baby," Samuel repeated. And then he was laughing and crying at the same time, pulling Adelaide into his arms and holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The pregnancy was not easy. Adelaide suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well past the first 3 months. She was exhausted all the time, and as her belly grew, the simple tasks of daily life became increasingly difficult. But Samuel was there for her every step of the way, taking over the household chores without complaint, bringing her tea and crackers when she was sick, rubbing her swollen feet and aching back at night. "You are going to spoil me," Adelaide said one evening as Samuel massaged her feet, her belly now round and prominent at 7 months along. "Good," Samuel replied, his hands gentle on her skin. "You deserve to be spoiled. You are growing our child. That is the hardest work there is." In August of 1879, on a blistering hot afternoon when the cicadas were singing in the cottonwoods and the air shimmered with heat, Adelaide's water broke. Samuel rode to town faster than he had ever ridden in his life and came back with Mrs. Henderson, who was known to be the best midwife in the region. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day. Adelaide had never known pain like this, pain that consumed her entire world, that made her scream and curse and beg for it to be over. But Samuel never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement and love. "I cannot do this," Adelaide sobbed at one point, exhausted beyond measure. "I cannot. It is too much." "Yes, you can," Samuel said fiercely. "You can do this, Adelaide. You are almost there. Just a little more. I am right here with you. I am not going anywhere." And finally, as the sun was beginning to set on the second day, with one final push that took every ounce of strength Adelaide had left, their son came into the world squalling and red-faced and perfect. "It is a boy," Mrs. Henderson announced, laughing through her own tears. "A big, healthy boy." Adelaide collapsed back against the pillows, sobbing with relief and joy as Mrs. Henderson cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a soft blanket. Samuel was crying too, unashamed tears streaming down his face as the midwife placed the baby in Adelaide's arms. "Hello," Adelaide whispered, looking down at her son's tiny face. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." The baby quieted at the sound of her voice, his eyes, dark and unfocused, seeming to look up at her. Adelaide touched one tiny hand with her finger, and the baby's fist closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Samuel said in awe, reaching out to touch his son's downy head. "Adelaide, he is perfect. You did it. You were so brave." "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked, unable to take her eyes off the baby. Samuel was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "What about James? It was my father's name. James Samuel Kincaid." "James," Adelaide repeated, trying it out. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, my sweet boy." Those first few weeks with a newborn were a special kind of exhausting that Adelaide had not been prepared for. James needed to eat every few hours, day and night, and Adelaide felt like she was moving through a fog of sleeplessness. But every time she looked at her son, every time Samuel held the baby with such tenderness and awe on his face, Adelaide felt her heart might burst with love. Samuel was a devoted father, taking over every task he could to give Adelaide time to rest and recover. He walked the floor with James when the baby was fussy, changed diapers without complaint, and sang lullabies in his deep voice that put both baby and mother to sleep. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Samuel said one night, holding James while Adelaide tried to eat a meal with both hands for the first time in days. "It is terrifying and wonderful all at once." "I know," Adelaide agreed, watching her husband cradle their son. Sometimes I look at him and I cannot believe he is ours, that we made him, that we get to keep him. As James grew, the cabin rang with new sounds. Baby laughter, the pounding of small fists on the table, the patter of tiny feet when he learned to walk at 10 months old. Adelaide and Samuel marveled at every milestone, every new tooth, every new word. The ranch was growing too. Samuel had bought a small herd of cattle, and with the help of a few hired hands during the busy seasons, he was building a reputation as an honest, hard-working rancher. Money was still tight, but they were making it, slowly but surely building something lasting. When James was 2 years old, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news came with less fear and more excitement, though she still had moments of anxiety remembering how hard the first birth had been. "We know what to expect this time," Samuel reassured her, his hand resting on her slightly swollen belly. "And you are even stronger now than you were then." Their daughter was born in April of 1882, an easier birth than James had been, much to Adelaide's relief. She came into the world with a full head of dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and they named her Elizabeth Marie, after Samuel's mother and Adelaide's mother. James was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to touch her constantly, bringing her his favorite toys, singing to her in his toddler voice. Adelaide's heart felt so full watching Samuel with both children, seeing the man who had paid her father's debts and taken her hand, transformed into a devoted father who played on the floor with his son and rocked his daughter to sleep. "Can you believe this is our life?" Adelaide asked Samuel one evening as they sat on the porch they had built onto the cabin, watching James chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while Elizabeth slept in her cradle. "Sometimes I still cannot believe it is real." "Believe it," Samuel said, reaching over to take her hand. "This is real. This is ours. Everything we have built together." The years rolled on, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. They expanded the cabin, adding on 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Samuel bought more land and more cattle. Adelaide started keeping chickens and a milk cow, and her garden grew larger every year, providing vegetables to sell in town as well as feed the family. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved animals and following his father around the ranch. Elizabeth was all fire and laughter, climbing trees and catching frogs and refusing to be constrained by what little girls were supposed to do. Adelaide and Samuel let her be wild, figuring she would be tamed soon enough by the world. In 1885, Adelaide gave birth to their 3rd child, another son they named Thomas after the ranch hand who had stood up with Samuel at their wedding. Tom Riley had become a good friend to them both, and he wept when they told him about the baby's name. And then, in the spring of 1887, Adelaide found herself pregnant for the 4th time at the age of 31. This pregnancy was harder than the others, leaving her exhausted and sick, and both she and Samuel worried about complications. "Maybe this is the last one," Samuel said gently one night as Adelaide struggled to find a comfortable position with her swollen belly. "Maybe 4 children is enough." "Maybe," Adelaide agreed, though part of her felt sad at the thought. She loved being a mother, loved the chaos and noise and love that filled their home. Their 4th child, another daughter, was born on a crisp October morning, and Adelaide knew the moment she looked at her that this baby was special. She had a calm, peaceful presence even as a newborn, rarely crying, seeming to observe the world with wise eyes. "What should we call her?" Samuel asked, holding the tiny bundle with the practiced ease of an experienced father. Adelaide thought about it, then smiled. "Hope. Let us call her Hope." because that is what you gave me the day you walked into that saloon and paid my father's debts. You gave me hope for a future I thought I would never have." Samuel's eyes filled with tears. "Hope," he repeated. "It is perfect." Life settled into a rhythm over the next few years. The children grew and thrived. James, at 12 years old, was already a skilled rider and roper, working alongside his father on the ranch. Elizabeth, at 10, could outride most boys her age and had a way with horses that was almost magical. Thomas, a sturdy 8-year-old, was the peacemaker of the family, always mediating disputes between his siblings. And Hope, at 4, was the baby of the family, doted on by everyone and already showing signs of her mother's intelligence and her father's stubbornness. The ranch prospered. Samuel's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled rancher had spread, and the Kincaid Ranch was now one of the most successful operations in the region. They had built a proper house, a large, comfortable structure with a wraparound porch and enough bedrooms for the whole family. Adelaide had a real kitchen with a cast-iron stove and a pantry, and she kept a beautiful garden that was the envy of the county. Money was no longer tight. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, secure in a way that would have seemed impossible to Adelaide in those dark days of scrubbing floors. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1888, Samuel took Adelaide back to the spot where he had proposed, the rise overlooking the creek where he had first told her about his dreams for the land. "Look at what we built," Samuel said, gesturing to the house visible in the distance, the barns and corrals, the cattle grazing on the hillside. "Look at what we made together, Adelaide." Adelaide looked out over their land, their home, thinking about everything that had brought them to this moment. "Sometimes I still dream I am back in that saloon," she admitted quietly. "I dream I am on my knees scrubbing floors, and I wake up in a panic before I remember that it is over. That I am here with you, that we have this life." Samuel turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "You never have to go back to that. You never have to be that person again. You are Adelaide Kincaid now. You are my wife, the mother of my children, the strongest woman I know. And I love you more now than I did the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible." "I love you too," Adelaide said, tears streaming down her face. "I love you so much, Samuel. Thank you for seeing me that day. Thank you for caring. Thank you for giving me this life." "I should be thanking you," Samuel said. "You took a chance on a cowboy with nothing but a dream and a piece of land. You have worked beside me every step of the way, building this place, raising our children, making our house a home. Everything good in my life started the day I walked into that saloon and saw you." They kissed there on the hillside, the same spot where Samuel had proposed 10 years earlier, and Adelaide felt the same sense of rightness of coming home that she had felt that day. The children grew older. James, now a young man of 17, was talking about staying on the ranch, working it with his father, eventually taking it over when Samuel was ready to step back. Elizabeth, at 15, had become a beautiful young woman, though she still preferred riding horses to attending social events, much to Adelaide's amusement. Thomas, at 13, had discovered a love of reading and was talking about becoming a lawyer, which filled both Adelaide and Samuel with pride. And Hope, at 9, was growing into a thoughtful, creative girl who loved to draw and paint, capturing the beauty of their land on paper. Samuel's hair was going gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Adelaide had a few strands of silver in her own dark hair, and her hands bore the calluses and scars of hard work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had met in a saloon in Los Alamos and fallen in love over beans and cornbread in a tiny rented room. In the summer of 1893, James announced that he wanted to marry Sarah Thornton, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. Adelaide found herself helping to plan a wedding, amazed that her little boy was old enough to be taking a wife. "Does it seem possible?" she asked Samuel one night as they sat on their porch, watching the stars come out over the mountains. "Our son is getting married. We are going to be grandparents soon, I am sure." "Nothing surprises me anymore," Samuel said with a smile. "Life has a way of moving forward whether we are ready or not." The wedding was beautiful, held at the Kincaid Ranch with half the county in attendance. Adelaide watched her son marry his sweetheart and thought back to her own wedding day, 15 years earlier, in the little church in Los Alamos. So much had changed since then. So much had been built and grown and nurtured. And true to Adelaide's prediction, she and Samuel became grandparents the following spring when Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named Samuel James Kincaid after his grandfather and father. Adelaide held her grandson for the first time and marveled at the circle of life, at how quickly time passed, at how love multiplied instead of dividing when it was shared. Elizabeth eventually married as well, choosing a young veterinarian who shared her love of animals. Thomas did become a lawyer, practicing in Santa Fe but coming home to the ranch as often as he could. And Hope, their youngest, showed such talent for art that Samuel and Adelaide sent her to study in Denver, though they missed her terribly when she was gone. As the new century approached, Samuel and Adelaide found themselves with more time alone together as their children built their own lives. They had slowed down some, letting James and his family take over more of the day-to-day running of the ranch, though Samuel still rode out most days to check on the cattle, and Adelaide still kept her garden. "We are getting old," Adelaide said one morning, looking at their reflection in the bedroom mirror. She was 53 now, Samuel 57, and the years showed on both their faces. "We are getting seasoned," Samuel corrected with a grin, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist, "like a good piece of leather." Adelaide laughed and turned in his embrace. "You always know how to make me feel better." "That has been my job for the past 21 years, Samuel said, kissing her forehead. "And I plan to keep doing it for at least 21 more. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in October of 1903 with all 4 of their children, their 3 grandchildren, and a crowd of friends and neighbors. There was music and dancing and more food than any one group of people could possibly eat. Adelaide danced with Samuel under the stars, just like they had at their wedding, and felt like the luckiest woman in the world. 25 years, Samuel mused as they swayed together. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I walked into that saloon and saw you scrubbing floors." "Best decision you ever made, paying off those debts," Adelaide teased. "Best decision I ever made was asking you to marry me," Samuel corrected. "Paying the debts just gave me the opportunity to know you. Marrying you gave me everything else." The years continued to roll by, marked by the birth of more grandchildren, by holidays spent surrounded by family, by quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset. Samuel's hair went fully white, and Adelaide's followed suit. They both moved a little slower, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their love for each other never diminished. In the spring of 1910, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them. Their children were all grown and settled, living their own lives, and for the first time in decades, Samuel and Adelaide were truly alone in the house they had built together. "It is quiet," Adelaide observed as they sat on the porch after dinner, the spring air soft and sweet with the scent of apple blossoms from the trees she had planted years ago. "Too quiet," Samuel asked, reaching for her hand. Adelaide laced her fingers through his, these hands that had worked so hard together, that had held each other through joy and sorrow, through the births of children and the building of a life. "No," she said softly. "Not too quiet, just different. A new chapter." "I like the sound of that," Samuel said. "What should we do with this new chapter?" "Everything we have always done," Adelaide replied. "We wake up together. We work together. We love each other. We watch our grandchildren grow. We grow old together." "Sounds perfect to me," Samuel said, and he leaned over to kiss her, the same kiss he had given her 1,000 times before, but still somehow new and precious. They sat there on the porch as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and built something lasting and true. From debt and despair had grown love and family, and a legacy that would extend far beyond their own lives. Adelaide thought back to that morning in 1878, when she had been on her knees scrubbing a saloon floor, when her future had seemed like an endless stretch of servitude and shame. She thought about the cowboy who had walked through the doors and changed everything, who had seen her when she felt invisible, who had given her not just freedom but love and partnership and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "What are you thinking about?" Samuel asked, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Everything," Adelaide said honestly. "The life we have built, the children we have raised, the love we have shared. How grateful I am for every moment, even the hard ones." "Me too," Samuel said softly. "Every single moment. I would not change a thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night around them. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and closer by, an owl called out. The night was alive with the sounds of the land they had worked and loved for over 30 years. "You remember what you told me that first night?" Adelaide asked suddenly. "When you paid off the debts and I asked what you wanted from me." "I remember," Samuel said. "I told you I wanted to court you, that I felt a connection, that I wanted to see if it was real or just foolishness." "And," Adelaide prompted with a smile, "definitely real," Samuel said firmly. "The realest thing in my whole life. You were worth every penny of those debts and more." "You were worth everything, Adelaide. You still are." Adelaide felt tears prick at her eyes, even after all these years, even after all the times Samuel had told her he loved her. "You saved me that day," she said softly. "You gave me back my life." "No," Samuel said, turning to face her fully. "We saved each other. I was just drifting before I met you, Adelaide. I had no anchor, no reason to stay in one place, no reason to build something lasting. You gave me a purpose. You gave me a home. You gave me love and family and everything that makes life worth living. We saved each other." And sitting there on their porch, surrounded by the land they had built their life on, Adelaide knew he was right. They had saved each other, two people who had found their way through darkness to light, who had taken a chance on love and been rewarded beyond measure. The years ahead would bring more joy and more sorrow, as all lives do. There would be more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. There would be losses too, friends passing away, the inevitable decline that comes with age. But through it all, Samuel and Adelaide would face it together, their hands clasped, their hearts joined, their love as strong in their later years as it had been in the beginning. And when people asked Adelaide about her life, about how she had gone from scrubbing floors to being the matriarch of one of the most respected families in the territory, she would smile and say simply, "A cowboy walked into a saloon one morning and changed my life. He paid my father's debts and took my hand, and I have been holding on to him ever since." It was a simple story, really, but it was theirs. A story of love found in unlikely circumstances, of two people who chose each other and built a life together through hard work, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to face whatever came their way side by side. As the stars wheeled overhead and the night deepened around them, Samuel and Adelaide Kincaid sat together on their porch, two souls intertwined, their love story written not just in words but in the very land beneath their feet, in the children and grandchildren who bore their names, in the home they had built with their own hands and hearts. And if you had asked them if they had any regrets, if they would have done anything differently, they would have both answered with a resounding no. Every moment, every choice, every hardship and joy had led them to this place, to this life, to each other. It was more than either of them had dreamed of that day in Los Alamos when a young woman scrubbing floors had looked up and met the eyes of a cowboy who saw her worth. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, a tale of redemption and hope and the transformative power of love. And as they finally rose from their seats on the porch and made their way inside, preparing for bed just as they had done thousands of times before, they did so with the certainty that they would wake up together the next morning and every morning after, for as many mornings as they were given. That was the true gift, the real treasure they had found in each other. Not the freedom from debt, though that had been the catalyst. Not the land or the house or the material success they had achieved. The treasure was this: the daily choice to love each other, to build together, to face life as partners in every sense of the word. Samuel helped Adelaide undress, his hands gentle and familiar on the buttons of her dress. She helped him with his boots, pulling them off as he sat on the edge of their bed. These small intimacies, repeated countless times over the years, had become a cherished ritual, a physical manifestation of their care for each other. They lay down together in the bed they had shared for 3 decades, Samuel's arm around Adelaide, her head resting in the hollow of his shoulder where it fit perfectly. Outside, the wind whispered through the cottonwoods, and somewhere in the darkness, their land stretched out around them, solid and real and theirs. "I love you, Adelaide Kincaid," Samuel murmured into the darkness. "I love you, Samuel Kincaid," Adelaide replied, her hand resting over his heart, feeling its steady, reliable beat. And there, in the house they had built together on the land they had worked together, surrounded by the legacy they had created together, Samuel and Adelaide drifted off to sleep. Two people who had taken a chance on love and been blessed beyond measure. The story that had begun in a saloon in Los Alamos, New Mexico in 1878 had grown into something beautiful and lasting. A testament to the fact that love could be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes, when you are at your lowest point, salvation can walk through the door in the form of a cowboy with blue eyes and a generous heart. Their love story would be told for generations, passed down through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a family legend about the day a cowboy paid off a young woman's debts and won her heart in the process. But for Samuel and Adelaide, it was not a legend. It was their life, lived fully and completely, with all the messy, complicated, beautiful reality that comes with building a life with another person. And if you had been able to look into their hearts in that moment, as they lay sleeping in each other's arms, you would have seen that neither of them would trade a single moment of their life together for anything in the world. Because what they had found in each other was more precious than gold, more valuable than land or cattle or any material wealth. They had found home. They had found love. They had found each other, and in the end, that was everything.